Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of the big stories around the world relevant to the Sikh community. And as the case against a Khalistani campaigner here in the UK is potentially dropped for allegedly damaging the Indian High Commission in London, despite pressure from India, attention turns once again to the likely assassination by India of Avtar Singh Khanda. Well, despite the British state doing its level best to bury that story, the community has not forgotten and won't let this lie. More on this later and lots more in today's show. But joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. As you can see, I've forgone the tie today because of the fact that it is Orange Shirt Day in Canada, a day of truth and reconciliation with our Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples. So I'll explain that in a few more minutes. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to keep on sharing, keep on liking, and by all means, keep inviting your friends to follow us and to subscribe to the channel. It helps push us up in the algorithms, not to mention it makes us smile. Back to you, Angus.
Indeed it does. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And at the end of the show, as always, we'll take a look at loads of your great comments which I've poured in beneath the video. So thank you, as always, for those. Right, James, what are you going to start us off with today?
As I stated in the intro, it is Orange Shirt Day. Now, Truth and Reconciliation Day is a federal holiday here in Canada, and it's meant not only to remember the past of the children that went through a lot of horrific abuses in the Indian residential schools in Canadian history, but also to ensure that that we remember, we talk about it, and we try to find reminders and ways forward to really find a pathway to you can't make up what happened, so I won't say to forgiveness for what happened with the children there, but at least a path forward to work with the First Nations, the Inuit, the Métis, and the other Indigenous groups in Canada. Now, as many people are aware, there were a lot of unmarked graves, as many as 6,000 of children who passed away, whether that was from tuberculosis or through abuse, or children that lost their lives trying to escape these residential schools. Now, with that, it draws a similar parallel to what we see today with the Dalits and as well as the Sikh community in India, where they're trying to be stripped of their culture, of their language, and of their ties to the past. Now, on our Substack, I have done a lengthy article that explains a lot more depth about the Indian residential schools, as well as the case studies and how that parallels to, as I said, the situation in India, as well as other regions around the world. But with that said, folks, I just wanted to make sure that I wore my orange today in recognition of Truth and Reconciliation Day here in Canada, and to show my respects and appreciation for our Indigenous communities. Now, moving on, as we look at different communities around the world, it is something that we touched on several times recently, and that is the framing of the Bishnoi gang as a terror cell or a terrorist organization by the government of Canada. Tonight, I thought that I would actually bring forward and show you the official statement by the government of Canada and our law enforcement and public safety individuals and ministry. So it goes on here to inform that September the 29th, 2025 in Ottawa, Ontario, acts of violence and terror have no place in Canada, especially those that target specific communities to create a climate of fear and intimidation. That is why the Honorable Gary, however you say his last name, Minister of Public Safety, announced today that the Government of Canada has listed the Bishnoi gang as a terrorist entity under the Criminal Code. Now, what does this mean? Now that it's listed on that terror group, they are meeting the definition in various ways. Now, under Canada's Criminal Code, a terrorist listing means anything owned by that group in Canada, property, vehicles, money can be frozen and or seized, and Canada gives law enforcement more tools to prosecute the terrorist offenses, including those related to financing, travel, and recruitment. Recruitment is a big one. Now, for example, it's a criminal offense for anyone in Canada or Canadians abroad to knowingly deal with property owned or controlled by a terrorist group. It is also an offense to directly or indirectly provide property knowing that it will be used by or benefit a terrorist group. So that means that you cannot provide any services, products, or items to anyone who is known to be a member of the Bishnoi gang, because you are then committing a criminal code infraction yourself and can be prosecuted. Now, the criminal code listing can also be used by immigration and border officials to inform decisions on admissibility into Canada under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. The Bishnoi gang is recognized as a transnational criminal organization operating primarily out of India. They have a presence in Canada and are active in areas with significant diaspora communities. The Bishnoi gang engages in murder, shootings, arson, and generates terror through extortion and intimidation. They create a climate of insecurity in these communities by targeting them, their prominent community members, businesses, and cultural figures. Listing the Bishnoi gang will help Canadian security intelligence and law enforcement agencies in combating their crimes and making communities safer. Now, he went on to just state that every person in Canada has the right to feel safe in their home and community. And as a government, it's our fundamental responsibility to protect them. Specific communities have been targeted for terror, violence, and intimidation by the Bishnoi gang. Listing this group of criminal terrorists gives us more powerful and effective tools to confront and put a stop to their crimes. So very clear as to what the intentions are, and that Canada is very much and very aggressively going to go after the Bishnoi gang and any of its members here in Canada, as well as seizing assets. And of course, we have forfeiture act here in Canada as well, which means that they can permanently seize assets instead of just holding them. Now, the several offenses that you look at, as I said, you want to be aware of what your responsibilities are if you are dealing with anybody, even if it has nothing to do with the Bishnoi gang in itself or unknowingly. You want to be aware that dealing with any person who is knowingly a member or associated with that gang could potentially put you at risk for criminal liability or even action by, as I said, law enforcement or immigration and refugee status. All of that can be impacted. Very important, very big news, but I thought that it was very important to share that with the community to make sure that the word gets out. As you can see, there are 85 listed organizations on Canada's terror list. And this includes Al-Qaeda, this includes Al-Shabaab, Ansar Dine, as well as many others. So Babar Khalsa International is on that list, Blood and Honor, Boko Haram. So you can see the length of the list, but also the extreme level that you must be rated at or recognized as in order to get on that list. And it's not a list that you want to be on. Other ones are like the Islamic State and many others. So again, it is a very, very important list to Canadian security, to Canadian law enforcement, to international security. And again, the Bishnoi gang is now on there with the Proud Boys, the Russian Imperial Movement, and so many others. So again, just so that you're aware, there are liabilities for anybody knowingly doing business with the associates of the Bishnoi gang as well. Now, as we move on, there has been yet another shooting here in Surrey, this time targeting the media. A local station, 1040 AM, is a radio station based here in Surrey, British Columbia. It has a variety of different programs, including multilingual programs, so different languages, from news, talk radio, and current events, as well as just other type of talk radio programming. Now, the big thing about this is that Ginny Sims, who was a former MLA and member of the provincial parliament legislature, is a host on the program. As she and others arrived at the office, they noticed that the front door was smashed in from bullets, as well as other bullet marks throughout the front windows of the station. Fortunately, it is believed that it happened last night, or actually Monday night around 9 p.m. They did not notice until first thing in the morning when they arrived for work, because the station was closed at that hour. So fortunately, nobody was injured. Nobody was at risk at that point, which really is a blessing in disguise that there was nobody at that point, because let's face it, janitorial staff or others could be in the building at any hour of night or day, where even the gangsters may think it's empty, but somebody could be inadvertently hit. A bullet could ricochet, hit someone on the street. So it, again, regardless as to the status of the location being open or closed, it still paints a very dangerous picture of what's going on in the streets of Surrey and across Canada when it comes to this. It also has been reported that there has been previous involvement, or discussions, I should say, between the owner of the station and various police agencies. And that is believed to be a part of an extortion attempt. So we are seeing again that when the extortion attempts are not brought forward, of course, there is less protection. But even when they are brought forward, such as in this case, then there is an elevated risk to those reporting. And that is creating havoc when it comes to trying to get a grip on these crimes as they're going on across Canada. Now, of course, there's the psychology of fear and trying to really put a terror mentality to this. However, it should also be noted that a lot of these people who are shooting up the businesses, the homes, they're doing it at night. They're doing it under the cover of darkness, and they don't want people to know who they are, obviously. They want to try and avoid being identified by different cameras that may be present in whether that is intersection cameras or security cameras on local businesses or residential homes. And it's becoming even more brazen that we've seen incidents happen throughout daytime, right in the middle of busy business hours as well. But again, it is targeting the South Asian community overall, and believed that it does have ties to the India government, as the Bishnoi gang has been identified by now both Canada and the US as being a proxy for the India government. So it is very important that people do speak out and that people do have their voices heard. If you are the target of extortion threats, of warnings, please make sure that you report to your local law enforcement agency. There has been several reports that Angus and I have done recently about the increase in the task force and the both the provincial and national levels to try and crack down on this extortion problem and the violence that it brings forth. Now in Surrey, of course, we continue to see shootings and other events. Here you can see a vehicle just by the trees there. It's harder to see in this image, but it is there. We'll zoom in a bit if we can. And you can see that it was burnt here on one of the industrial streets in Surrey, and that was a while back. But again, very common practice after a shooting event or a murder, where they try to burn the vehicles in order to rid any evidence. If you happen to find any evidence, whether it is dispelled gun cartridges or whether or not it's actually a weapon, make sure that you do not touch it. You secure it, so make sure no children can play with it if it's a gun or whatever. Contact law enforcement immediately so that they can come and gather any evidence and maintain if there's fingerprints or DNA. By you not touching it yourself, you can preserve that evidence for the local police department to gather. Now, of course, we also know that with this, as I said, it's happening in the darkness of night a lot of times, where these businesses are closed to send a message and to clearly intimidate those individuals that they're trying to get money out of. Now, there are many other incidents, such as Manpreet Bopari, who's the owner of 22 Auto Sales, and that is in, I believe that's in Edmonton, if I'm not mistaken. Or sorry, no, Mississauga, or regardless, Caledon, which is Ontario. Sorry about that. But anyway, his Mitsubishi dealership was sprayed with 36 rounds of gunfire. And again, over the family of Avtar Singh Khanda, 51-year-old Sikh entrepreneur in Mississauga, Ontario. We know that he was the target of a murder, and that was after he refused to pay a $500,000 demand. He was shot and killed in his own office parking lot. So it shows that the brazenness of some of these are happening right in midday time. Other ones are individuals who are using the Bishnoi gang as a cover or as a weapon, so to speak, in that they use the name Bishnoi as being associated, but they really aren't in some cases, but they know that just the name and the insinuation that they're connected to it instills a higher level of fear. And of course, that means that it's being weaponized just in that word, or just in that part itself. Now, other areas that they're involved in are protection rackets, so attempting to set fires and arson to businesses who fail to pay this protection money, which we know goes way back to, the Italian mobster days in New York and Chicago. Even Al Capone had protection rackets. But again, this is seeing the ugly face of that racket coming back. And then we see a lot of other cowardice and just disgusting acts by these individuals. Once more, you can find much more in-depth reports on our Substack as we try to keep on target for our timeline tonight. So with that, folks, if you, again, are the victim of or know of someone who's a victim of this extortion racket that's ongoing, please make sure that you reach out and get assistance, as it definitely has proven in the past that if you do pay them, chances are they're going to keep coming back to you and trying to get more out of you. So be safe, but also reach out and get help, Angus.
Yeah, interesting. I say one of India's more successful exports is, of course, its organised crime, and here we see it in Canada. But of course, we know the FBI are really identifying it on a large scale across the US, but particularly in California. These extortion rackets, which are essentially generated by, well, it's the likes of the Bishnoi gang. The Bishnoi gang is actually the most well known of it. But it's interesting that other gangs are trying to piggyback on his reputation by claiming, we are from the Bishnoi gang, which of course then instills fear into more victims. Ironically then, how powerful then this designation in Canada, and probably I suspect soon in the US, that the Bishnoi gang has now been labelled as terrorists, because it now also has this indirect effect with other gangs, other criminals, who will now think, maybe I won't use the Bishnoi gang anymore because it's going to make it even harder for them to operate. So that in itself is helping nipping that in the bud, as we say. But yes, it's again, we talked a lot about the Bishnoi gang yesterday, and this label. This labelling as a terrorist organisation is very powerful. It is a hugely powerful step forward in combating their operations. Now, of course, the big distinction here is it is this huge step from being a criminal gang to being a terrorist organisation. That is what then enables a hugely more powerful state machinery to then get into motion to try and clamp down on it. But of course, there's an interesting perspective here. There is another argument here. And I don't think this applies so much to the Bishnoi gang. But for example, it does highlight, for example, here in the UK, we had a recent designation of a protest group. It's one of these Palestine protest groups that appeared. And again, it's overtly political. They were campaigning against the issue in Gaza and Palestine, etc. But they have actually now been designated here in the UK as a terrorist organisation. Now, that actually was primarily because they did a very stupid thing. They actually broke into an RAF, a Royal Air Force base, and damaged some military assets. Stupid, but it's part of their protest, and I certainly don't support it. It's a stupid thing to do. But as a result, they have now been designated as a terrorist organisation, which now means that they essentially cannot speak their minds without fear of being arrested and locked away for a very long time. But this does actually raise this whole issue about freedom of speech. And again, this is something that we talk a lot about, freedom of speech. And of course, there is an argument now raging here in the UK about once you start designating criminal or protest groups as terrorist groups, and again, we start to see the parallels with the Khalistan organisations, it then does start to impinge on freedom of speech. What constitutes a terrorist organisation as opposed to criminal organisation or a simple protest group?
Right.
And it's not as simple as, well, it becomes political, because of course there are political groups who have a freedom of speech. What then designates a political group becoming a terrorist group? Well, I suppose argue there is a legal case. Well, when you start damaging or becoming a genuine threat to the state through criminal damage, like invading an RAF base, for example. So, but again, you start to see the lines are not very clear. There are blurred lines here. And this is where we need to be very careful. And it has a very direct impact on the Khalistan campaign, because, of course, India has been working so hard to designate the Khalistan campaign as a terrorist campaign. Of course, it isn't. It is a peaceful, democratic campaign. But the pressure on Western governments coming from India is you must designate these people as terrorists. Well, what activities do the Khalistani campaigners do that then designate them as terrorists? If they do criminal damage, as actually has been shown, and my story will touch on this as well, does that mean that they are terrorists? And again, you start to see these sorts of grey areas. And here's another different angle on this as well. I noticed, James, in that list of designated terrorist organisations in Canada, one of those is Gulbuddin Hikmatyar and Hezb Islami. Now, here's a weird thing and how things can change. In the 1980s, I spent 3 or 4 months with Gulbuddin Hikmatyar and Hezb Islami in Afghanistan. That was a time of the Russian invasion. And I met Gulbuddin Hikmatyar. I met one of his generals, Massoud, who was then since assassinated, etc. But they were a deeply Islamic organisation. They were one of the 7 factions at the time that were fighting back against the Russian invasion. But does that mean, therefore, that I have terrorist links? But you can see, but over time you see, and this comes back to the old phrase, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. So you can start to see how the grey areas really impinge on this. You know, what actually is a terrorist? If you go up against a state and you start acting against a state, if you protest against a state, does that make you a terrorist? And what actions do you take against that state that then designate you, again, from a protest group or a freedom fighter into a terrorist? So again, James, this is a very, very difficult area to try and get clear definitions. And of course, the law is fighting constantly over this. But what it does, the point that really highlights is the governments ultimately hold that decision. The governments can make that decision. But what if that government is running out of control? And of course, here I'm paralleling with India. India controls the narrative. India controls the law, the legislature, the executive, the judiciary. So, in other words, a freedom fighter in India is very easily labelled as a terrorist. We've got to be careful here in the West that we don't follow down that same route. Now, of course, the Bishnoi gang, there is a clear criminal intent, that's criminal, but there is a clear political angle to this. They are anti-Khalistani. They've been very public about it. Does that make them terrorists? Not necessarily, it doesn't. But their activities, as in going out and bombing people and shooting people, well, clearly that's criminal. Is it political, and therefore is it terrorist? Again, it's all down to the legal definition. So again, it's just not as clear cut. Of course, we totally support this idea of labelling them as a terrorist organisation, but you can start to see the implications. We have to be very careful and be absolutely sure that these organisations are indeed terrorists in what we would want them to be defined as terrorists. So there you go, James, not clear.
Yeah, no, it is definitely one of those quandaries that you've got to look at and try to really find out what are the nuances, what are the technical terms, what exactly is going to get you onto these lists that you don't want to be a part of. And let's face it, though, being anything associated with those lists when it comes to flying or travel at all can really put a kink in your plans. And sometimes you won't know it until it's too late, Angus.
Indeed, and who knows, I may get a knock on the door from the Canadian RCMP asking about my past and my so-called terrorist links. There's an interesting one. Anyway, let's...
They'll have to borrow a horse from your from the King's Watch there or something, because, you know, our horses aren't trained to swim that distance.
Well, indeed. Well, I look forward to meeting a member of RCMP. They're a formidable force indeed. So anyway, let's move on. And actually, my first story actually is sort of linked really to this, and it's a story here in the UK about protest, about anti-India protests. And this, of course, anybody who's familiar with the story of Avtar Singh Khanda, the Khalistani campaigner who died under very suspicious circumstances a couple of years ago. This story is very much linked to this. There's been an ongoing court case against a Sikh activist. And this court case has been stayed, that has been delayed, put aside, almost put on the back burner by a judge 2 years afterwards. And this is linked to the case of Avtar Singh Khanda, rather indirectly. So on the 16th September 2025, proceedings against Gurcharan Singh at Southwark Crown Court, that's near London, here in the UK, concerning alleged attempted criminal damage to the Indian flag during a protest at its London High Commission building in March 2023 were stayed. Now, this was a protest outside in London, outside the Indian High Commission, at the time of Amritpal Singh's manhunt, when the Indian authorities were trying to track down Amritpal Singh, which ultimately he handed himself in. But during that time, of course, there was a lot of anger, a lot of protest, particularly in the Punjab and certainly amongst the diaspora. And in London, there were big protests against India and their actions against Amritpal Singh. Gurcharan Singh, at the time, he was a noted UK activist, part of the Dal Khalsa UK group. And two of his colleagues, who actually have not deliberately been named, now face no charges regarding accusations that came from India, specifically the Indian High Commission. On the 19th of March, when these protests were erupting outside the High Commission, it was, as I say, specifically, it was invaded by thousands of paramilitary groups and a communication sorry, this is back in Punjab. Punjab was shut down by the Indian state. And again, this is a very typical Indian government tactic. Every time there's any dissent, any dissatisfaction, or people start taking the streets, the first thing the Indian government do is they close down the internet. They close down any communication systems to try and prevent people communicating to then get out into the streets. So this is what they did in the Punjab. This was around the time of Amritpal Singh. So, of course, people were getting angry in the Punjab about this manhunt. So India shut the Punjab down. As a result, lots and lots of protests erupted around the diaspora, and including this one. And it was known as per this article, #Punjab under siege. And we know the history of Amritpal Singh. He was, of course, elected to the Lok Sabha. He represented this movement, this pro-Khalistan movement, but also anti-drugs and all these things that the Sikh community actually stood for. And as a result, he was elected with a record majority. Anyway, during this protest in London, a video was taken that went viral of a Sikh, as we call them here in the UK, a Sikh who climbed up the front of the High Commission and removed the Indian flag, the Tiranga as it's called. This is the Indian national flag, from the front of the building. And this actually sparked a huge backlash across Indian media. Unsurprisingly, it is a very provocative, evocative act, anybody removing or damaging a flag. And it's a very symbolic act. And of course, unsurprisingly, the Gandhi media went into overdrive over this. And the video of this individual, it's very difficult to work out the identity of the individual from the video. The video is too grainy. And that attack was labelled as a terrorist attack, violent attack, etc. It was simply somebody climbing up and removing a flag, but it was labelled by India as an act of terrorism. And Indian media publicly then named by Avtar Singh Khanda as the person who had removed this flag. This was not true. Apparently, Avtar Singh Khanda wasn't even in attendance at that protest, yet his name went viral, particularly amongst the Hindutva social media accounts, and he became a target as a result of this. Now, as a result of this then, shortly afterwards, he died under very suspicious circumstances. He was allegedly got leukemia. I think it was acute myeloid leukemia, it's called. And but it happened very quickly. And again, he was in perfectly good health, apparently, literally up until a few days when he suddenly went ill, went into intensive care, and 2 or 3 days later, dead. Now, according to official reports, it was natural causes. But a lot of people have raised a lot of concerns, as indeed his family with his barrister, are now investigating this. And the British state immediately closed it down. They prevented an autopsy. They prevented the usual normal protocols of a suspicious death moving into place. Normally, this would have been investigated because, don't forget, this also happened at the same time, literally almost within days, of the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and others. In other words, the British state knew full well that the Indian state, RAW, were active and assassinating Khalistani campaigners. Avtar Singh Khanda, of course, was a very high-profile Khalistani campaigner. So, again, why did the British state not investigate what was a highly suspicious murder or death at the time? And again, the coroner's office and the police have played ping pong with this, saying, "Oh, it wasn't our fault; it was their fault. It wasn't our fault; it was their fault." In other words, the whole thing has been very deliberately brushed under the carpet. But at the time, even India, the Indian media were celebrating. I mean, right across social media, and I'm showing just a few here, just a few examples. Avtar Singh Khanda, a member of the KLF who pulled down the Indian flag from the Indian High Commission in London, which he didn't, died in a hospital. He was suffering from blood cancer. He was an expert in making bombs and also radicalising youth against India. No, he wasn't. He was a peaceful Khalistani campaigner. And yet, according to Hindutva media, he was a terrorist. And again, the celebrations and the assumption by Hindutva social media was that RAW, the Indian intelligence agency, had been behind this killing. In other words, it was a plain and simple political assassination by the Indian state. And as, again, I'm showing you lots and lots of examples of these. He was an architect of the attack on the Indian High Commission in London. Khalistani groups have blamed Indian intelligence and RAW for his death, though officially UK attributed the death to blood cancer. But then one person says, in just 2 months, and he was killed within 2 months, that's quick, Mossad will be proud of you. And there are pages and pages of examples of tweets, Twitter accounts, basically saying, well done, RAW, this was clearly one of your actions. And even higher up the chain from political levels, politicians were publicly saying, this is great, essentially implying that it was actually a move by the Indian state. And as a result, then there was a bit of a tit for tat going on at the time, and the attack on the protest outside the Indian High Commission at the time by the Sikh community, by the Khalistanis particularly, and the pro-Amritpal Singh supporters. India blamed the British for that. They blamed the British police and the British government, saying, this was a huge security lapse. Why did you allow these Sikhs to attack our High Commission? As a result, in a tit-for-tat, they removed the security fencing outside the British UK consulate in Delhi. I mean, it's a deeply irresponsible act because essentially diplomatic properties have to be protected for all the reasons, because if you don't protect ours, we won't protect yours, etc. And innocent people, innocent diplomats, commissioners, whatever, and innocent people working in those embassies become potential victims of mob violence. It's a cretinous thing to do, to be frank. Whichever nation you're from, whether it's Russia, North Korea, we still protect North Korea's embassies, or China's embassies, or Russia's embassies, or Iranian embassies, all these embassies that might arguably be enemies of our state, but we will protect their assets in our countries because we expect the same in their countries. If that structure falls apart, then diplomacy falls apart. We need diplomacy. Anyway, so I'm getting down a side issue there, but basically Delhi, in a tit-for-tat, removed the protection of the British consulate in Delhi, which again is a stupid thing to do. But it shows the level of mentality of the Indian state. And so there's a few press releases there that you can see of that tit-for-tat barricade being removed. It really was a silly thing to do. And post these events, and after that flag was removed, even the family of Avtar Singh Khanda back in the Punjab, and again this reflects a lot of incidents and a lot of other Khalistani campaigners here in the diaspora who have family back in Punjab. The family are targeted by the Indian state. And again, this demonstrates the cowardice and the methodology of the Indian state against the Khalistan movement, is that if you campaign for Khalistan out in the diaspora, where we might not be able to reach you, although they do their very best to do so through transnational repression, then we will target your family. And that, of course, is what happened to Avtar Singh Khanda's family, detained by the local police. And again, we talk regularly about Khalistani campaigners, whether it's in Canada, US, or here in the UK, their families are targeted back in Punjab. They're innocent family members. And as I say, as a result, Avtar Singh Khanda, a couple of months later, after the incident, was then suspiciously died. But as the prevailing belief goes among certainly anybody outside India, is that he was murdered alongside Hardeep Singh Nijjar by RAW. And we do know that India did send intelligence officers into the UK at that time. Now, back to the original story, and this is the one of Gurcharan Singh himself. So Gurcharan Singh was actually, he was arrested as a result of this Indian High Commission protest. And he was the one actually officially, according to the British state, who was being charged with criminal damage. And the original charges related to criminal damage worth £20,000 against the consulate, but a lot of this has been driven by India. The Indian state machine has pressured the British law enforcement and the British government to bring charges against Gurcharan Singh. But now, as a result of actually more investigations and clearly a lot of work going on behind the scenes, charges haven't been officially dropped, but the case has been stayed indefinitely. In other words, well, is it really are we going to achieve a conviction here? Again, it speaks volumes. But Gurcharan Singh himself has made a statement, and unsurprisingly, the Indian media have just completely ignored the fact that the case has effectively been dropped. And he said, there is no case to answer. I'm pleased with the outcome. Thanks, everybody, for their support. The Indian government has been unable to provide evidence as to the monetary value of the flag or the cost of any alleged damage. In the absence of evidence, there's no basis for sustaining a criminal charge. And he remains, as it says here, involved in Sikh activism, specifically standing against Hindutva tyranny and in support of the Khalistan movement. So there you go. I mean, that bases the story. So in other words, Gurcharan's case has been dropped. India's been trying very hard, in summary, to clear his name. But the real victim of all this is poor Avtar Singh Khanda. And as I said in the introduction, we will not forget Avtar Singh Khanda. We will not let his murder, because clearly his death was not by natural causes. There are too many suspicions around it. The timing was suspicious. It was very clear Avtar Singh Khanda was most likely murdered, and most likely by the Indian state. We will not let that his memory fade away. We will keep talking about Avtar Singh Khanda until the British government does something about it. It's appalling that nothing has happened, but as I say, his barrister, on behalf of the family, Michael Polak, the barrister, is working very hard still behind the scenes to bring this case and push forward for a judge-led judicial inquiry into what happened. Because we know the British state covered this up, James. We know that there's a lot of suspicions around this, and we need the truth.
Absolutely, Angus, and let's not, sugarcoat it, that it is a murder. It is, in terms of our opinion, of course, we don't have the evidence to prove that, but in our opinion, we see it as a murder. And for the timeline to work, it just is an astronomically aggressive form of cancer that would need to have taken place, where it went from a complete undiagnosed, unnoticed, and asymptomatic seriousness to all of a sudden life-threatening and actually killing them. It just doesn't make sense in this realm. I know that there are some very aggressive forms of cancer. I know that it can, in very rare cases, happen that expeditiously, but I think that more likely than not, it definitely was at the hand of another. When you look at the part of them really, being concerned about the flag, when they're looking at, the identification of an individual, well, it was part of a protest and such, and yeah, it was a stupid move of the protesters to breach any type of high commission or embassy. That is, in some circles, considered an act of war, which could be, of course, they take into consideration all the circumstances, but again, it can be seen as something extremely serious. And lead to some very dramatic escalation, especially when they're on diplomatic property, where the security on that property and as such on a building could fall into the hands of the government that is that basically it's their territory. So they could open fire or take actions against individuals who are breaching their sovereignty by entering that space unauthorized. And so it's important to keep that in mind. But again, it's very rare that that does happen. Usually it's a consideration of what the overall context. This was a protest, and it wasn't something that was meant to be aggressive or to that extent. It was just a stunt by protesters. But yeah, it can be serious. And I mean, you can look back at the Iranian crisis where the Canadian diplomats snuck out some of the American consulate workers and diplomats because of an attack that was going on, the instability in the region, the wars, all of that sort of thing. So again, it could be taken by the wrong people as a very aggressive act as well. So it just, common sense sometimes prevails, and sometimes that gets lost in the heat of the moment of different activities, including protesting, Angus.
Indeed, and I'll leave the final words of this story to Gurcharan himself. He said, "It is clear that the case was an attempt to curtail the fundamental right of Sikhs to peacefully protest against the actions of the Indian state while in the United Kingdom. The right to protest is a cornerstone of democratic society, and attempts to criminalise legitimate dissent undermine this principle." So, wise words from Gurcharan. I think that really sums up actually probably the theme of today's show. And talking about the right to protest and freedom of speech and what have you. Breaking news overnight. This story came in overnight. Here in London, this is just indirectly linked to this. Mahatma Gandhi, a statue of Mahatma Gandhi was vandalised and graffitied overnight here in London. And again, I'll just quickly flick through this story, but it happened in Tavistock Square in Bloomsbury. This is in central London. And let me show you the picture. There you go. This is the statue of Mahatma Gandhi, and it's sprayed with words, if you can read it: Gandhi, Modi, Hindustan, terrorist, daubed all over it. So I have no idea who was behind this. They don't know who was behind this, but I think we can probably guess. We do know that Gurcharan Singh had his own campaign to deface particularly statues of Dr. Ambedkar across North America, and I suspect this is probably indirectly linked to this same sort of general sort of anti-Indian establishment feeling that runs through the diaspora. Of course, the Sikh community have no real respect for Mahatma Gandhi. I think that's an understatement. We do know Mahatma Gandhi's history, and of course, I'd refer people to many of the podcasts I've done talking specifically about Mahatma Gandhi. He is not this, and the story in the Daily Mail, this is one of the news outlets, talks about he was this great campaigner who fought for Indian independence. He was this sort of great peace lover, etc. Well, for those of you who watch the podcast know, he was no such thing. He was a racist. He fought within the British Army, so he was not a pacifist. And he has a very questionable background in terms of his personal life as well. And in fact, it's interesting, if you look at some of the comments, I won't share them up here, but some of the comments after this article, many do actually bring out some of the truth about Mahatma Gandhi. So, but there you go, James. That's an interesting little sort of overnight news, is that there are still people with very strong feelings about Mahatma Gandhi here in the UK.
Absolutely. And let's face it, if he was alive today, he'd probably be on the Epstein list. We'll just leave it at that in terms of his personal life. But yeah, absolutely. There's no love lost there by any stretch. However, I do personally find it offensive to really deface any public work of art or any monuments, and it's more a disrespect to the community and the artist, and that it's nothing to do with who is commemorized on that. But again, I do believe that there is a point that this was a peaceful type of protesting, and for that I give them credit for at least being peaceful, and hopefully it'll just wash off with some paint remover. But again, it is part of the society that we have and a part of the protests that are going on.
Indeed, and we certainly would never support any sort of graffiti or violence. I mean, by all means, go out there and protest, drape something over it, but we certainly don't support damaging or defacing even Gandhi's statues. So, Anyway, let's move on to our comment section. Loads of comments again, and again, I'm just going to show a load more that came in after the podcast I did with Layla. This was talking about Khalistan, because we had such a huge, very positive response, and some really interesting comments came after that one. Govinda Sond, one of our regulars, talked about, and again, I did touch on this, about China encroaching upon India, both in the northwest and the northeast. Maybe I'll do a separate podcast about this, because it's actually quite an interesting area, this. But yes, as you rightly say, China has designs on the whole of Asia, and it has encroached and infiltrated certain parts of northeast, those peripheral fringes of India, and the Indian government seem to have done nothing about it, James. So again, these two huge nations sitting side by side, there's an awful lot of potential there.
Absolutely, and we'll watch and see how it plays out. But then again, it's hard to say what's happening behind the scenes either, right? You don't know who's planning what and or where or what they're working together on.
Indeed, and the dynamics between China and India, fascinating subject. So again, maybe we'll do a podcast on that one.
That's right.
Hat B says, this is a cry that many support. Actually, the British should make up for what they did in partition, not least pre-partition, by dividing Punjab. Let's bring back the Sikh Raj, which they infiltrated. Yeah, but again, what is the Sikh Raj? What are the boundary definitions? And that podcast really tried to sort of come to an idea of what it should be. But Observer the Witness has been really active on this on this video in the comments. It's Bharat's mistake. We not punish Britain for atrocities they committed on the people of Bharat. Well, yeah, there were a lot of atrocities that the British did on India and the people of the subcontinent. But as Hat B responds, well, actually, the Indian government has killed more Indian citizens than the British or even the Mughals ever did. Go check your facts. The Indian government are so evil, they left the Mughals long back. So I think, yeah, it's the Indian government since 1947 have probably been the ones that we should be focusing our attention on, James.
Absolutely. And, we can all take responsibility for the lack of what was returned to the Sikhs in the partition of 1947, because they got screwed, plain and simple. They were lied to by India. They were mistreated in the way that the lands were separated. They should have been at least given back the original Punjab, and both sides, whether that's Pakistan or India, they should have had that, which could have been Khalistan today. So I think that is a very valid point.
Indeed. And Observe the Witness came back. This is a really interesting comment. If Hindus and Sikhs remained united, both would remain safe. That the Britishers and the Gora, the white people, never wanted to see this unity. This is about the divide and conquer strategy of the British Empire. And you're absolutely right. This is true. This is exactly what the British Empire did. All 1984 was designed by the US and UK with the help of Pakistan and Pakistani Sikhs. I don't think that's true. I think the events of 1984 were orchestrated by the Indian state, the Brahmins. The UK might have had an indirect assistance in that. The British establishment clearly didn't prevent it happening. But I don't think it was designed by the British. And I don't think certainly Pakistan had anything to do with it either. I think it was just a clear and simple evil act by the Gandhi dynasty and by the Brahmins, the Indian state. Just like today, they topple the governments and plant their own leaders, because Indira Gandhi was a strong leader, etc., etc. The Sikh population always grown. Sikh own big business in India, but the reverse is in Pakistan. The Sikhs hold major government positions. So again, there's two arguments here that you're making, and I think these are very important arguments. Firstly, is that the US and UK want to weaken other nations for the benefit of the West. And I wouldn't disagree with this. I think this, again, is all about global geopolitics. The West is always fighting this battle to try and stay on top. But so is China. So is Russia. Every country is trying to do the same. So it's not hypocritical to say, yeah, we probably are, because everybody else is doing it. This is how you try and stay on top. So unfortunately, yes, this is a sad fact of life. Now, the other interesting comment here is about Sikhs uniting with Hindus. This is what we want. We don't want division. This is what Hindutva are trying to do. They are trying to divide the communities. They're trying to turn Hindus against Sikhs, turn Hindus against Islam, against Christians, etc. This is their tactic. Ironically, they're adopting the tactics of the British Empire, divide and conquer. That is what they're doing. So yes, Observe the Witness, we totally agree with you. We think Hindus and Sikhs should reunite, but unfortunately we cannot defeat the Brahmins within India. The only solution is the establishment of Khalistan, where Hindus will be completely welcome, as will any religion. All people will be welcome. They're not welcome in India, other religions, but they will be welcome in Khalistan, James. That's the key point here.
Absolutely, and we've talked about this to great lengths, Angus, and the equality that came with the Sikh Empire, with the different representation for the different religious groups and minority groups, and it worked well. And I think that when it happens again with Khalistan, it's going to be a pillar for the region to show how that representation can be not only there in as in some places where it's just there to be able to meet certain standards or certain public perceptions and image issues, but it's going to show that it truly can be a benefit and make things better.
Yeah, and the final line of your comment, Observe the Witness, is they want proxy nations near big nations. Yes, that is absolutely why the West wants Khalistan. It wants that beachhead, as I call it in the podcast. They want that representation, that ally in the region, because India is not a reliable ally. Pakistan is an ally. Is it reliable? Again, you can have a debate about that. But ultimately, it needs a nation. It needs a foothold in that region just to essentially try and keep world peace. That is reason. There's no secret behind that. So yes, you're absolutely right in that. So. Something or other, that's a mouthful. I hope Khalistan is made as per the Sikh request. At least we will not share any border with India, an enemy of Pakistan. I think I think you're based in Pakistan, so thank you for your comment. Pakistan and Khalistan have a more brotherly relationship and will both be prosperous without RSS aggression. Pakistan would prefer Khalistan. Yes, I totally agree with you. I think absolutely the Pakistan side has been deeply amicable, deeply friendly towards the people of Punjab, the Sikh people of Punjab. I only need to talk about the Kartarpur corridor as just one simple example of that, and the recent spat over the Pahalgam attacks, where Pakistan was accused, and arguably falsely accused, of being behind that attack. That hand of friendship between the Sikh people in India and Pakistan is clear, and it is a very strong friendship, and I think it's very encouraging, James, that we see this hand of friendship reaching across the border from Pakistan to the Sikh people in Punjab, and I think that will be reflected after the establishment of Khalistan.
Absolutely, and then also, of course, the point of discussion that we've had before about it being a buffer zone as well, to help try to ease some tensions along the along that border as well. That could have some beautiful and peaceful results, Angus.
Indeed, and the next comment from Sukwant 690 comes back to, again, talking about the Brahmins in 1984. And this is, I find this comment actually almost quite sad. In 1984, thousands of Sikh families are killed by organised Hindu terror. Yes, it was terrible. The events of both Operation Blue Star and the genocide that followed at the end of October, early November. The tens of thousands that were murdered in cold blood, tortured, murdered, terrible stories that came out. But don't forget, many Hindu families helped protect and hide fleeing Sikh families. It wasn't Hindus versus Sikhs. It was a small number. It was a small, dangerous mob whipped up by the Brahmins. And Baz actually corrects you, saying, look, planned by the masters, the Brahmins. So in other words, and again, we have to keep saying this, we are not an anti-Hindu channel. We are very much pro-Hindu. And we, again, talking about the hand of friendship, we reach the hand of friendship across to the Hindu community, particularly in India. But what we always will target our ire against, our anger against, is the Brahmin, the upper caste, the ruling elite. They are the ones that orchestrate these events. They are the ones that manipulate ordinary Hindus to turn against their fellow Sikhs, Christians, whatever it is. So ultimately, 1984 was perpetrated by a small mob of people whipped on by the upper caste Brahmins, James. That's an important distinction.
Absolutely. And, when we look at the past, we look at whether it's the Khalsa and, the different reasons that you can find for brotherhood and for cooperation between all of the different areas. It's essential, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that with that Khalsa also stood fast against the caste system, and something that we see is officially out of India, but still very much active.
So what we're trying to say is we have nothing against Hindu, and we don't want Sikhs to turn against Hindus. We do know that a lot of our audience, understandably, have a dislike of Hindus because of events like 1984. But don't forget, what we're trying to say is, look, it's not all Hindus. Most Hindus are normal,
Right.
decent people, and they want to get on amicably with everybody else. It's just a small minority of these that are essentially manipulated. It's these Hindutva extremists that is our united enemy, just as much an enemy of ordinary Hindus as well. So. Pam Singhni, thank you so much for this. Yes, in Panj Pyari, that's how to pronounce Panj Pyari, this concept that dates back to the original Khalsa from the last living guru. It is pronounced Panj Pyari. I've never been able to pronounce it correctly, so thank you, Pam, for correcting me on that one. Thank you generally to our audience when we get things wrong, and thank you for your corrections. It helps us on our educational journey, James.
Absolutely, and we appreciate it every single time. So don't ever be shy thinking that we're going to be insulted. So no, always feel free to correct us.
Indeed, and a brief sojourn into Critics' Corner with one of our recent regular critics, which is Shazad Purisanulisaram. I love saying his name. Western people must show us the map of Khalistan. Well, if you watched the podcast, we did. What the hell are you talking about? Absurd, says Nira Ranjan. India's divided once, never going to create, I think what you meant was Khalistan. Well, ultimately, particularly in reply to show us the map of Khalistan, there it is. I showed it in the podcast. That is the Khalistan that we will be campaigning for. That is the Khalistan that, God willing, and touch wood and everything, is going to happen. The United Nations is going to recognise this because it has a legal and a democratic mandate. And all we need now is just a democratic referendum, and Khalistan will be unfolded, James.
Absolutely, and what a beautiful map it is, Angus.
Indeed it is. And the final set to wrap us up for the day. Baz starts these off with, this video should be published in New York Times or big media to show the world why there should be a Sikh nation. Well, much as I would love our broadcast to reach such lofty heights of the media, we will just keep digging away in our little corner of the internet and on IPTV. But it's up to you, our audience, to spread that word. Why not send a link to the New York Times and big media? Maybe they might pick it up. Really important that it's very much up to our audience as much as us to try and get that word out, get us a little bit more publicity, James.
Absolutely, and if anybody has a bit of time on their hands, by all means, feel free to copy the links to some of your favorite videos and send them out to other media outlets or to community groups and all of that, because we do appreciate it. I try to share on occasion on different Facebook groups, and that really helps as well to get our name out there. So by all means, you're more than welcome to do that, and we would appreciate it very much.
Indeed, we have a very loyal core audience, and yes, we do notice that you're out there, and we do notice the regulars and everything. So thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for your loyalty. And as always, it's very much a two-way street. If you can help us, then we'll do our best to get the truth out there. But very much, we need our own army out there, our own army to spread the word and get more people to hear us and see us, etc. Balbir, of course, says, do you want Khalistan? Well, you're not alone there, Balbir, as it was when Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji ruled. The sooner the better to have our own homeland. Well, as I said in the podcast, I think it's a bit ambitious to hope that we'll get the original Sikh empire back, because that did include large parts of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Ladakh, India. I think there will be a lot of resistance on that. I think democratically and legally we'll struggle to get that original Sikh empire back. But I think the original map of Khalistan, that map of Khalistan I showed just then, I think that is a realistic ambition, James. That is what we will be campaigning for.
Absolutely, Angus.
And Jagtar Sidhu says, yeah, absolutely, this is the truth. The referendum is the only solution for the freedom of Punjab. It can only be achieved democratically, but this is what will happen. There will be, we hope, one day a referendum soon in the Punjab, because the pressure is mounting from the international community, thanks to people like Gurcharan Singh in the US, who is pushing for this. But don't forget, he's just one of many out there, many active campaigners who are doing incredible work, very much behind the scenes, many of them, but very much also in the public profile, and they of course are making themselves target. So we've got to pay tribute, James, to those campaigners out there, the Khalistan campaigners, who are literally risking their lives on a daily basis by getting out there, getting the good message out, and campaigning for this wonderful concept of a Sikh sovereign nation.
Absolutely. And let's face it, we do our small part here, but we are by no stretch really putting ourselves out at risk when you take into account what others are doing and the real and apparent risk that they're at. So, again, thank you to them.
Indeed, and the final word of the day goes to Sukhdeep Virk, who says, Khalistan is coming soon. Khalistan is on the way. Indeed, it absolutely is, James. We know it is just around the corner. We can even smell it. It's that close.
It's like one of those movies, coming soon to a continent near you.
Indeed. Khalistan Zindabad, indeed. So it's just round the corner, as Sukhdeep Virk says. But unfortunately, we must bring perspectives to close for another day. Thanks so much for all your comments. There have been some great comments, really interesting ones as well. So thank you for all those. Don't forget, you can message us directly at message@satlugetv.com if there's anything you want to bring to our attention directly, as many of you have indeed been doing. So thank you to those of you who have corresponded. But that is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.